Okay, let's go ahead and start, and whoever can join us because we have so much to go over tonight. I'm going to try fast, and if anybody doesn't understand what I'm talking about, please interrupt me, ask questions, because I want this to want you to understand this. But there's so much in these last 7 verses of Daniel that I was just going over my notes for the last hour, and I'm already exhausted. just reading all this. Oh, so put on your seatbelts. We are going for one crazy ride tonight. Daniel, we've got so much. There's so much in here. It will just blow your mind. It'll blow your mind. Okay, let's go to the Lord in prayer before we start. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you so much that you have given us this book of Daniel. What an awesome book. And we just pray that we will, you've given it to us to understand. And I hope that we will be able to get it and understand it and give you the glory, Lord, because this is the most fascinating passage in scripture that is just a gift that you have given us. And we just thank you for it. And I pray that we will do honor to your word tonight. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Yes. Everybody's good? Okay. Yeah. All right. So I did read in the 17th century, a very learned Jew had published a book in where he gives his testimony about how he came to Jesus Christ as his Messiah. And in the part of the book, it says that he was listening to a debate between a knowledgeable Jew and a Christian convert from Judaism on the meaning of Daniel 9, verses 24 to 27. The mediator of the debate was a rabbi, and as the Christian pressed the claims of this passage home, it became so clear that this passage was pointing to Jesus Christ that the rabbi closed the debate and said, "Let us shut up our books, for if we go on examining this prophecy, we shall all become Christians."
Oh,
this is how very clear that Jesus Christ was the Messiah, and he came exactly when it was prophesied for him to come. Okay. So, in fact, a lot of Jews are forbidden to read Daniel 9 because that prophecy is so very clear. So we're going to go over it tonight. So this prayer, this is Daniel at the beginning of 9. He's praying, and so this prayer is regarding his prayer is regarding the 70 years of being in captivity, but the answer is regarding the 70 weeks of years. Yes. And the prayer is a prayer for restoration. The answer is an ultimate restoration of the coming Messiah. And so that's the correlation there. So let's look at Daniel 9, verse 20. Daniel says, "While I was still speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my plea before the Lord my God in behalf of the holy mountain of God." So here we see that even while he was speaking and praying, the answer came. He hadn't even finished his prayer, and God sent Gabriel to Daniel right away. That was a quick answer. We don't always get that quick of an answer, right? But the Father knows the things that you need even before you ask him, right? So here we see an immediate answer to this prayer. And the Holy Mountain of God, of course, is a reference to the site of the Temple Mount, where the Temple Mount was. It's Mount Moriah. And Mount Moriah was where Abraham went to offer Isaac. That's where the temple was built. The second temple, when they were allowed to go back into Jerusalem from Babylon to build the temple. That's where they built it, on the Temple Mount. That's where Herod rebuilt the temple. He beautified it, And then it's also the place of the Dome of the Rock, where the Muslims have their temple. So that's the holy mountain of God. So verse 21, it says, while I was still speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision previously, he saw Gabriel in chapter 8, same angel, came to me in my extreme weariness upon the time of the evening offering. Now, the evening offering is around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay, they had when they had the temple, they had a morning offering and an evening offering, and of course, the Jewish day,
9th hour,
begins and ends at it ends at 6 p.m. and begins at 6 p.m. and it starts again at 6 a.m. Just like we have 12 noon and we have 12 midnight, right? Well, the Jews started there at 6, and they had evening and then morning. And so when it says the evening sacrifice was between 3 and 4 o'clock, because starting from 6 a.m. to 3 is 9 hours. In the 9th hour is called the 9th hour, which is 3 o'clock. That's also the same time of day that Jesus Christ died on the cross as the sacrificial lamb at the time of evening sacrifice. Now, verse 22. And he instructed me and talked with me and said, Daniel, I have come now to give you insight and understanding. And so, he, probably God instructed Gabriel to come to Daniel and give him insight and understanding. And then verse 23, at the beginning of your pleas, the command was issued, and I have come to tell you because you are highly esteemed. So pay attention to the message and gain understanding to the vision. So here it says highly esteemed. Other versions say precious treasure, greatly beloved, great value. This is coming from God. Gabriel says God is calling you highly esteemed or precious or beloved. That's an awesome testimony of Daniel's character. So the angel Gabriel says, pay attention, and you're going to understand what I'm about to tell you. So it is something that can be understood. Gabriel was sent to give him the understanding of the vision. So let's dive into 24, verse 24.
Oh my.
70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the wrongdoing, to make an end to sin, to make atonement for guilt, to bring an everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the holy place. So here he tells him, this is why 70 weeks have been decreed. And we'll find out what 70 means. But he says, this is the reason. Okay. So here the message is, and I'll tell you that there's 2 reasons for this message. One is that the Jews could have known the time of the Messiah's arrival. They will know it. They would have known it. And then 2, the Jews would be able to know the time of the anti-Messiah or the Antichrist's arrival. That's all in this passage right here. So also in this passage, we're going to see the 7 years. The book of Revelation actually doesn't mention 7 years. It mentions 3.5 years and 3.5 years, but it doesn't say specifically 7. So we get that from Daniel. We also get from Daniel, this portion of scripture, the abomination of desolation, where the Antichrist sets himself up in the middle of the 7 weeks as in the temple and stops the Jewish sacrifices. We don't really see that in Revelation. We get that from Daniel. Okay. we get it from Daniel, we get it from Jesus talking about it in Matthew 24, Luke 21. So Daniel is very important study to the book of Revelation. Okay. And nowhere in this passage of Daniel is there any reference to the church. This all has to do with Jews, what's going to happen to Jews. It has nothing to do with the church. There are people who like to ram, jam, and cram the church in this passage, and we are not there. This is about Jews. Okay? So that's very important to understand. So Daniel had just asked about the return to their land, but instead God gives them a revelation about these 70 weeks. Okay, so wait a second. Here's a list. Here's a list of what Gabriel says. We're going to talk about the 70 weeks, and the 70 weeks is going to accomplish these things. And if you made a list of those things, you would have seen finish the transgression or finish the wrongdoing. Okay. And also you see that it says 70 weeks have been decreed for your people. Who's Daniel's people? The Jews, not the church. And for your holy city, and that would be what? Jerusalem. Okay.
Jerusalem.
So that's what it's been decreed for. And the reason why is to finish the wrongdoing. And this is kind of to bring an end to the transgression of the Jews. Okay. And that will the final stopping point will be at the end of the 70 weeks when the Jews will no longer be sinning. They will all be have a new heart, a heart that worships the true God and their Messiah. So Gabriel was saying that Israel would not stop its rebelling against God until these 490 years, 70 weeks run their course. Okay, and that happens at the second coming of the Messiah at the end of the tribulation. Yes. The other reason he's given him this, what is decreed in the 70 weeks, is to make an end to sin. Make an end to sin. The idea of it is to make an end of sin, is to bring Israel's sin under restraint. So when Israel is no longer going to sin against God, is going to happen at the end of the tribulation when they go into the millennium. That's another reference to that, because they're all going to be saved. Let's look at Ezekiel 37, verse 22 and 23. Okay, this is talking about the millennium. This is talking about at the end of the tribulation. And it says, and I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel, and one king will be king for all of them, and they will no longer be two nations and no longer be divided into two kingdoms. Now that happens at the end of the tribulation when the millennium starts. They will be one nation, and they will have one king. And we're going to look at some other verses that show that that they will have a righteous heart. They will have righteousness. Okay. And verse 23. I didn't finish it, did I? They will no longer defile themselves with their idols or with their detestable things or any other offenses, but I will rescue them from all their dwelling places in which they have sinned, and will cleanse them, and they will be my people, and I will be their God. That is bringing making an end to sin for the Jewish people. Okay. The other thing it does is to make an atonement for guilt. That's reference to the crucifixion of Christ. He's going to make an atonement. The once and for all sacrifice of the Lamb on Calvary. It's a finished work of Christ. The other thing the 70 weeks is going to do is going to bring about an everlasting righteousness. Isaiah 60:21. It says, then When is then? It's during the millennium. Then all your people will be righteous. They will possess the land forever, the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I may be glorified. So that happens in the millennium. Then the other thing he says the 70 weeks is going to do, it's going to seal up the vision and prophecy. Now, what this probably means is there's no, at the end of the 70 weeks, there's no more need for prophecy. There's no more need for revelation. All prophecies are going to be fulfilled. There's nothing going to be added to his plan or his revelations. That's implied by the seal. So when Christ comes back, there's no more need for visions and prophecies. Then he says the other reason for the 70 weeks is to anoint the most holy place. And that is in reference to the holy temple that's going to be rebuilt in the millennium. Okay. Now, it says that he talks about weeks, the 70 weeks. The Hebrew word there for weeks is Shubala, which is found 6 times in these 4 verses. And it means a 7. Okay. God likes 7s. We use dozens.
That's perfect.
A dozen Krispy Kreme donuts, a dozen eggs. You know, we like dozens. The Europeans, they like metrics. They like the tens. They like tens. Okay. But God likes 7s. So these are units of 7s. And we can think, well, what are the units of 7s? And we can think that it's, remember our interpretation of what we said, I think last week, about the rules of interpreting prophecy, is that if the plain sense makes good sense, don't make some other sense, or it's going to result nonsense. Okay. So we know that this 70 weeks is years. We know it now from looking back, but they understood it to be years as well. So 70 weeks would be 490 years. Okay. So because nothing happened in 490 days or anything else. So we it has been historically understood as years, 490 years. Okay, so let's break down this 70 weeks. How do we look at this 70 weeks? Okay, so verse 25 says, so you are to know and understand that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks, 62 weeks. It will be built again, and the streets and moat, even in times of distress. So here we have 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Okay. Now, God divides this into 7 weeks and 62 weeks. That's 69 weeks. Then that leaves 1 week left. Okay. So right now we're going to deal with the first part, the 7 weeks and the 62 weeks. The 7 weeks is 49 years. Now, where did it start? From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So that's when it starts. So when did that happen? And there are some differences of opinion, but most people believe this is Nehemiah 2.
Yes.
Now, remember back when Cyrus declared in 538, he told the Jewish people that they could go back and rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. Okay, because he believed that they should worship their God. He saw what happened with Daniel in the lion's den, and he said, you know what? You guys need to worship your God. He's a pretty powerful God. And they were allowed to go build the temple that was under Zerubbabel and Joshua. They went to build the temple. That was 538. But we see in Nehemiah chapter 2 if you read in verse 1 through 9. I don't know if we'll read all 9 verses, but let's kind of look at it. And it came about in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. Now, this would be about 444 BC. It's up there. That wine was before him, and I picked up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence. So the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, though you are not ill? This is nothing but sadness of heart." Then I was very much afraid, and I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the site of my father's tombs, is desolate and its gates have been consumed by fire?" Then the king said to me, "What would you request?" So I prayed to the God of heaven. Then I said to the king, "If it pleases the king and your servant has found favor before you, I request that you send me to Judah, to the king, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it." Then the king said to me, with the queen sitting beside him, she's a witness, "How long will your journey be, and when will you return?" And so it pleased the king to send me, and I gave him a definite time. And I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let letters be given me for the governors of the provinces around the river, so that they will allow me to pass through until I come to Judah," and so forth and so forth. Now, what happened here in 444 BC, King Artaxerxes allowed Nehemiah to go rebuild the city. That was not the temple, it was the city. And so the starting point would be 444, 445 BC. Okay. And because it talks about being built with streets and moats, even in times of distress. And if you read Nehemiah, you find out that he's not only building the wall, but at the same time he has building tools in one hand and a sword in another, because Sanballat is trying to keep them from building the wall. And so it was during times of distress. Okay, so that's the beginning of the 7 years. Okay, so 7 times 7 is 49 years. So now we don't know what happened after 49 years. There's nothing really in history that tells us what happened after 49 years. So we're not sure what ended that. But the passage here says there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Okay, so we add those together. 7 weeks, which is 49, and then 62 weeks, which is 483 years. So we get 434 years. So we get 483 years. Okay. So 49 years and 62. I'm sorry. 7 weeks plus 62 weeks equals 483 years. 483 years. Got that? Then that leaves us 17 years left. So 483 years. Now what happens at the end of 483 years? It says in verse 25, "From the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah, the Prince, there will be 7 weeks, 62 weeks. There will be 483 years." So when did the Messiah, the Prince, when was that? That terminates the 483 years. It is when Jesus, it comes out to the very day that Jesus Christ rode the donkey into Jerusalem, and they are shouting, "Hosanna to the King." He was presented as a king in Jerusalem on that very year that is prophesied here in Daniel, that the king, the Messiah, the Prince would come. From the building of the city of Jerusalem to the time that Jesus Christ rode into Jerusalem was 483 years. To the year, exactly.
I read where it said that they made an adjustment for the
360-day year of the Jews.
Right. There's different calendars. If you add up 444 and then add up 33 years, you get like 477 years, but that is in our Gregorian calendar. Okay.
Yes.
The calendar has changed several times. And
Well,
I gave you
the Jews have their own calendar as well.
Pardon?
The Jews have their own calendar, and this lines up with their calendar.
Exactly.
Yes, that's what I was pointing out.
The calendar, our calendar has changed several times. The Julius calendar, the lunar calendar, the solar calendar. The Jews, it works out, and I did give you a handout with a lot of minutia information, but when they broke it down in days, it came out exactly the days.
Yes.
That equal. So yeah, if you try to add it up with our calendar, it won't work. But according to the Jewish calendar, it works out exactly to the day that Jesus rode into the Jerusalem on a donkey. It's an amazing prophecy. Amazing prophecy. And you wonder why the Jews don't like to read Daniel 9.
Yes.
Okay. So, so let's see, where was it? And even when the officials insinuating this treason of Jesus, saying, why are they calling you the king? And Jesus said, if they should hold their peace, even the rocks would cry out. So he was confirming that, yes, he was king, but it was so prophesied that he was going to do it that day, be proclaimed king, that if they didn't proclaim him king, even the rocks would proclaim him king, because it was prophesied for him to come into the Jerusalem on that day as their king. And that's how it was done. So Jeremiah 9, Ezekiel 9:9. No, what did I say? Zechariah 9:9. I don't know. Did I give you that one, Danielle?
No.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to read it.
Yeah.
Zechariah 9:9.
Okay.
I have like 20 pages of notes here, and sometimes I skip over giving Danielle the references because it just gets buried in all my stuff. Okay, so Zechariah 9:9 says, rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is righteous and endowed with salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a donkey. That was Zechariah's prophecy that the king would come riding on a donkey. And it was Daniel's prophecy to the very day that he would do that. Isn't that amazing?
Yes,
Is that
it
amazing?
is. Yes, it is. Awesome.
What no wonder. Jesus said so many times to the Pharisees, don't you even read your own scriptures? How many times did he say that to them? You know, they didn't know their Messiah had come. And they should have just read their own scriptures.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions so far about all these numbers? I know it kind of gets muddled up, but it's 480 years, 483 years from the decree of the building of the city until the Messiah is pronounced. Okay. Y'all got that?
Got it.
Any questions? Okay. Now, verse 26.
Got a box because we forgot.
Mm-hmm.
Grandma, we had to stop by Family Dollar because they had no bug spray.
Okay. No problem.
Okay. Okay. Now,
What?
I'm sorry, verse 26. Then after the 62 weeks. Okay, that means that after the 49 years and after the 434 years, then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. Okay, so what does that mean? That is in reference to the Messiah. Okay, the crucifixion, he would have nothing in the sense that Israel had rejected him. The kingdom would not be instituted at that time, and therefore he wasn't going to receive his glory as the king on David's throne over Israel. And not only that, but all his disciples have flown off somewhere, you know. So he would have nothing. He would be cut off and have nothing. That is in reference to the cross.
Mhm.
Okay. So that happens at the end of the 483 years. And the people, now this is a little bit different time. This is what's happening in between the cross and the next seven weeks that we're going to talk about. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And it will come with a flood even to the end. There will be war, desolations are determined. So here, the people of the prince who is to come. So who are they?
Satan and his
You know what? I also didn't read Isaiah 53:8. Did we get that one? Yeah. By oppression and judgment, he was taken away. This is talking about their Messiah. And who can recount his descendants? For he was cut off from the land of the living and was stricken for the transgression of my people. That is referring to the cross. Okay, that's why we know that cutting off. He was cut off and he was stricken for the transgression of my people. He died for our sins.
Yeah.
Okay. So the people of the prince. Who are the people of the prince? We recall that Daniel previously revealed 4 Gentile world empires that would have a great effect on the fate of Israel. It was the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, Greece, and then finally Rome, right? So destroy the city and the sanctuary. The city, of course, is Jerusalem, and the sanctuary is the temple. Both of those were destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD.
right.
Okay. Now, so it is believed that the people of the prince are Romans. Okay. Now, some people do believe that they are Syrians, could be from Syrian descent, because, well, we'll go into that. I think I have it in my notes. We'll read it. Okay. Now, just to let you know a little bit about 70 AD, there was a Jewish revolt, very much like Antiochus Epiphanes. The Jews had enough, and the Maccabees revolted and said, we're going to take our temple back. Okay. It's very much like that in 70 AD. The Romans, up until this time, had pretty much peaceably worked with the Jews up until this point. But then they got some new emperors who decided that they were going to be a little harder on the Jews. It was the 12th year of the reign of Nero when they became actually more oppressive rule of the Roman governors and more harsh. One emperor made a law to have a statue in every temple in the Roman Empire to be worshipped. Sounds very much like Antiochus. It sounds like the Antichrist, but this happened in 70 AD. One Roman governor stole money from the temple, and the Jews had finally had enough. So in 66 AD, a group of Jews called the Zealots. One of the Jesus's disciples was a zealot. Do you remember his name?
Judas.
Judas.
No. Chosen? Did you watch The Chosen? There was one disciple who was a warrior,
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
and his name was Simon the Zealot.
Simon
Okay.
the Zealot.
A zealot became a resistant group against the Romans. Okay. So they decided they were going to push back. They were not going to tolerate this anymore. So there was a man called Titus, who was a general. He used the Syrian army and besieged Jerusalem. That's why some people think the Antichrist may come from Syria, because the Syrians had a big part in destroying the temple, but they were done under the Roman army. So one or the other. But anyway, the Romans surrounded Jerusalem and did a 7-month siege of Jerusalem, and during which the Zealots were fighting with them. The Titus started burning their food supplies, but the Romans succeeded in breaching the defenses of the Jerusalem wall. They and so there are some very interesting facts about what happened during this 70 AD. Over 1 million Jews died in this great revolt. Over 1 million Jews, and Jerusalem is not that big. Jerusalem itself. 1 million were killed. Those who tried to escape or were either captured or crucified. Often there's historical accounts that there were 500 were nailed to crosses on a given day.
Wow.
The forests around Jerusalem were completely destroyed to supply the wood necessary for battering rams, ramps, catapults, campfires, ladders, and many of the crosses that rose from outside the city. 500 crosses on a given day. Historians tell us that there was an unbearable stench because of all the dead bodies that they couldn't bury. When they surrounded the city and the people began to die of starvation, this is what Josephus says about this devastation. The terrible famine that increased in frightfulness daily annihilated whole families of the people. The terraces were full of women and children who collapsed from hunger. The cities were piled high with bodies of the aged. Children and young people, swollen with lack of food, wandered like ghosts until they fell. They were so far spent that they could no longer bury anyone, and if they did, they fell dead among the corpses they were burying. Their hunger was so unbearable, they were forced to chew anything and everything they laid hands on, that even the meanest of animals wouldn't touch. They had long since eaten their belts, their shoes, and even their leather jackets. And they also ate their children. In a single day following that, it wasn't over. Following the fall of Jerusalem in 70, 10,000 throats were cut in Damascus. They were all Jews. Many of them died as gladiators in games, and history just keeps on going, desolation upon desolation. I mean, was a horrible, horrible time in 70 AD. And this is why some people believe that Revelation is a history book, and it was describing the desolation of 70 AD. That it's not prophecy. That this was so horrible that 70 AD was, that they were the Antichrist, and that all already happened. And but the timeline doesn't work out. You still have 7 years still left to go, and we're going to finish talking about those last 7 years. There was also a place called Masada. I gave you a link to read about Masada. Yeah, I don't know if you had a chance to read it. It was a long article, but
I didn't get.
Masada. Did you guys get the link for Masada?
I didn't get the.
And then you read the article, it'll make more sense. But Masada was, Josephus records about Masada. Herod the Great was the emperor during Jesus' time, and or before Jesus, actually. But he built a huge palace on top of a plateau right near the Dead Sea, and he built it to as a refuge for himself, which he never did use because he was dead by then. But but also for an endless supply of food. Okay, so at the beginning of this revolt, there was some Jewish zealots that went and took over the palace, and they're at Masada. And so after the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the temple and all that, they went after the Jews in Masada. It was about almost 1,000 Jews that lived there in Herod's palace. Anyway, the Romans surrounded Masada. I've been to Masada twice. It's a very sad but fascinating place. You can see what they did is it took them a year, but they built an earthen ramp that went all the way up to the palace. And then they finally got into where these 1,000 Jews were being held up. And it took them a year. Apparently there was a lot of food in that palace, and they were able to survive it. But by the time the Romans arrived, they had all committed suicide except for 2 women and 5 children were found alive. And so that was the story of Masada. It's very interesting. We'll send you the link and you can read about it. But that was the end, near the end of the Jewish revolt. Now, the temple being destroyed. This was prophesied by Jesus.
Yeah.
In Luke 21.
Yes.
I put down Luke 21, but it's also in Matthew. But Luke 21, 5 and 6. Some of this, while some were talking about the temple, this is Jesus walking around the temple and they're on their way to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples are saying, commenting how beautiful their temple was. And it was beautiful. Herod had remodeled it. He was a good designer. He really dolled up this temple. It had gold on a couple of sides of the building that could be seen for miles. And anyway, it was a beautiful, beautiful temple. And so while some were talking about the temple, that it was decorated with beautiful stones and vowed gifts. Now, the stones were, when you walk around the Temple Mount, they have left some of the stones that were pulled down off of the temple. They've left them on the ground. You can see these stones because they're not stones. They're huge things. These stones some of them could be as far long as 40 feet long and 12 feet high and 12 feet wide. Some of them, they were huge. Some of them could weigh as much as 4,000 to 10,000 pounds. These are huge stones. And so when they were thrown down, you can go in Jerusalem today and see some of those stones that were part of the temple wall. But anyway, what does it say? Oh, and vowed gift. The vowed gifts is that people would donate golden statues or jewelry or plates or anything, and they would hang all these gold things in the porches of the temple. And so they're saying, look at all these gifts and all these huge, beautiful stones that were made out of white marble. So they're commenting on how gorgeous this temple is. And he said, which is Jesus, as for these things which you are observing, the days will come when there will not be one stone upon another, which will not be torn down. And so Jesus prophesied that would happen to the temple. And it didn't take long. It took just about another 30, 40 years. Okay. Okay, now Luke 21.
Yeah. 5 and 6.
Yes. Luke 21, I'm sorry, 20 to 24. I put 30, but anyway, it's 20, Luke 21 verses 20 to 24.
Okay.
Jesus is talking and he says, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains, and those who are inside the city must leave, and those who are in the country must not enter the city, because these are days of punishment, so that all things which have been written will be fulfilled. Woe to those women who are pregnant, those who are nursing babies in those days, and there will be a great distress upon the land and wrath to his people, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Now, this is talking about 70 AD.
Yeah.
Now, that Jerusalem's going to be surrounded by armies. Some are going to flee to the mountains. They fled to Masada. They couldn't go inside the city because Rome had it surrounded. They're going to fall by the sword, be led captive, and Jerusalem's going to be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. The times of the Gentiles ends at the end of the tribulation. The times of the Gentiles is a technical term that says that is from the day they left Jerusalem, when Babylon took them out of Jerusalem, until the end of the tribulation, when Jesus comes back and he takes over Jerusalem. Between those two periods of time, Israel has not ruled their own land and will not rule their own land until Jesus comes back the second time. The Jews, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say Israel. The Jews will not rule Israel. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So he spoke of the tribulation period of not of the tribulation period, what we call, but he's talking about 70 AD, even though some of the same things are going to be happening during the tribulation. So just like Antiochus was and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be war, desolations are determined. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, it means that there's going to be continuous desolation from that time on. It's going to be destruction that's just going to keep going on. And Israel has experienced a steady stream of desolations since 70 AD. The medieval crusades persecuted the Jews, challenged them by sword to either convert or die. The Spanish Inquisition did the same thing. The Russian pogroms, the Hitler's Holocaust, but the rise of the Antichrist will begin a satanically empowered Holocaust beyond all that Israel has ever experienced as of yet. So the final desolation by the Antichrist is a foreshadow of the Roman Holocaust that happened in 70 AD. So the importance of these verses in 25 and 26 is that these prophecies that were predicted, these three events, the Messiah's first coming, the Messiah's crucifixion, and the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem, they all happened literally. They were all fulfilled literally. That means that we have one more week that we need to talk about, and it is the 7th week that's going to be happening, and it's going to be fulfilled literally, right? Okay. So the last week or 7 years
27.
okay, the last 7 years or the last week, that we've already seen what happens in the 69 weeks. Now there's one more week or 7 years that's going to happen. Now, remember, we're talking about Jews. What's going to happen to the Jews? Okay. So when the Messiah was cut off, there was a parenthesis in history. God wasn't finished with the Jews, but he had kind of set them aside. There is a parenthesis in history, and that is the church age.
Hmm.
So from the crucifixion of Christ until his second coming is called a parenthesis. That's where it's not included in this prophecy of Daniel. The last 7 years is the tribulation period, because that's when God is dealing with the Jews again. Okay. So we are going to talk about Daniel 27 next week, because I have too many notes here on this last verse.
Yeah.
So I would rather end it here so that we can deal with that as a whole. And then also go ahead and study Daniel 10, because there's not a whole lot going on there, but we're going to, if we, we'll get through the rest of Daniel 9, and we should do kind of an overview of chapter 10. It's not as detailed, so we should be able to get through it pretty fast. So does anybody have any questions on the 69 weeks that we've talked about so far?
Well, shoot, sorry guys, I jumped in late, so but maybe I'll
Okay.
ask you on the side.
Yeah, you're gonna have to watch it from the beginning, because if you started now, you
I
will be
started at 7:30 and I'm like, oh crap, I forgot it was today.
Watch the recording.
She's always late.
What was the verse in Nehemiah again, that you were referencing?
That was Nehemiah chapter 2, 1 through 9.
Thank you.
All righty.
We got the
Okay.
recording on YouTube last week.
Yeah, now I did email you guys. Now, if you didn't get it, I'll try to do it again, or maybe we can text it with this. It was a link to the Ark of the Covenant that's in Israel, that they believe is in Israel, and they're starting to rebuild. They're starting to plan on rebuilding the temple. If you have a chance, I'll put that link. We'll put that link up that you can watch that video. It's fascinating that they're already planning on building the temple. They're getting it ready. They really
It's
are.
underneath. It's underneath where the temple was, isn't it? Down in the
That's what they
borders.
think it is. Yeah. The Ark of the Covenant has been lost since Babylon overtook it, and they believe that it never was found. They believe the priest hid it. And so it hasn't been in the second temple. It hasn't been in Herod's temple inside the Holy of Holies. It's been missing all these years. So, okay, there's the YouTube
Yeah.
connection. And also, if you get a chance to read the link I sent you on the Masada, it's just an interesting read, and it talks about the siege. There was 2 of them, I think. I sent you a siege of Jerusalem, and then one on Masada, and it tells you a lot of details on 70 AD. Did we get those?
Interesting.
Yes. You're awesome. Okay, any other questions? Woo! We still didn't get through it, but we got through a lot.
It's a lot. Right.
There was a lot, but this is fascinating. This is
You
just
think we'll get through with this book of Daniel by the end of summer?
yes.
I'm just kidding. This is awesome, though. I'm just kidding with you. So much detail.
Oh, there is. But we got through the hard part. This is Daniel 9, and then Daniel 11 is a hard chapter, and Daniel 12 is a hard chapter. Yes, we will still get through it.
Yeah, see, another thing a question I have, Pam, is I've always often heard that the Ark of the Covenant is in heaven. I don't know what, you hear so many different things. You hear that it's in heaven, that this was just like a copy of it, that Moses did. So you know what I'm saying?
Oh, you mean the original Ark of the Covenant that Moses
Yeah,
made?
yeah,
That is a copy of something in heaven? Is that what you're
yeah,
saying?
yeah. You've heard of that, and by other scholars and stuff, and that's why I was curious, when you were talking about that.
We'll have to check into that. We'll check into that when we talk about the temple next week. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
I watched a video about the rebuilding of the temple. And I wish I could find it, but they talked about the purchase of the land. There had to be a piece of land that was level with where the temple was built for them to bring in. I
Yeah.
can't remember all something. They talked about the red heifers. Really
Yes.
got into a lot of detail, and I'm going to look for it. And if I find it, I'll share it. But it was
Yes.
amazing.
Yes. And we are going to talk about the red heifer next week. We're going to talk about how the Jews they're getting ready. They are getting ready for this temple to be built. And it does not have to be built before the rapture happens, but we believe it will be built during the tribulation, and we'll talk about the timing of that and all that. So next week, very good. Yes. No, they're getting ready. Prophecy is very close to being fulfilled. Isn't that awesome?
Yeah.
Now you think it's near.
Yeah. Ark of the Covenant. Okay. Y'all studied Daniel 10, and we'll finish up 9 next week, and we'll do 10 next week. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Sounds
coming.
great.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
coming.
Pam.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you, Pam.